I'd just like to make the point that we're very fortunate that His Majesty has allowed us to use Buckingham Palace for this event, and I need to say that.
When King Charles announced his cancer diagnosis in February 2024, it forced a question the palace had spent years quietly trying not to ask out loud: what actually happens if a British monarch cannot do the job? The answer is written into law. But the more interesting story is what has happened around that law over the past 2 years, a real legal change that widened the circle of royals who can stand in for the king, a sister who has become so central to the working monarchy that aides reportedly struggle to keep up with her, and a 270-year-old precedent involving another woman named, and that nobody seems to remember until it's pointed out. This isn't a story about Charles secretly plotting to bypass Prince William. It's a story about how the monarchy actually handles incapacity, why Princess Anne has become indispensable to it, and why history already ran this experiment once. Britain's mechanism for royal incapacity is the Regency Act 1937, later amended in 1943 and 1953. It covers two very different situations, and the distinction matters. The first is full regency. If the monarch is under 18, or becomes permanently incapable, physically or mentally, of performing royal duties, a regent is appointed. Under the Act, that regent is the next person in the line of succession who is over 21 or 18, if they are the heir apparent. Today, that person is Prince William. Declaring this kind of incapacity isn't a casual process. It requires confirmation from at least 3 of the following: the sovereign spouse, the Lord Chancellor, the Speaker of the House of Commons, the Lord Chief Justice, and the Master of the Rolls. The second, far more common situation is temporary unavailability, the monarch going abroad, or being briefly unwell, such as recovering from a procedure. For that, the Act created a separate, more flexible mechanism: councillors of state. These are stand-ins, not regents. They can carry out routine constitutional functions, granting royal assent to legislation, receiving credentials from foreign ambassadors, holding Privy Council meetings, without any formal declaration of incapacity at all. The monarch's spouse plus the next 4 adults in the line of succession over 21 are automatically eligible. It's this second category, councillors of state, not the regency itself, where the real, documented change involving Princess Anne actually happened. By 2022, the automatic list of councillors of state had become awkward. Under the formula, the eligible pool was Queen Camilla plus the next 4 adults in line to the throne: Prince William, Prince Harry, Prince Andrew, and Princess Beatrice. The problem was that 2 of those 4, Harry and Andrew, had stepped back from public royal duties and were not realistically going to be called upon to exercise sovereign functions on the king's behalf. So in late 2022, Charles asked Parliament to widen the pool rather than remove anyone from it. Charles proposed Princess Anne and Prince Edward as additional councillors of state who could act on behalf of the king, needed to deputize when the monarch is abroad or unwell. The move was designed to resolve an awkward constitutional problem, since 2 of the 5 existing eligible councillors, Andrew, who had withdrawn from royal duties amid his association with Jeffrey Epstein, and Harry, who had relocated to the United States, were effectively unavailable. The resulting legislation, the Councillors of State Act 2022, received royal assent on the 6th of December, 2022. It is formally titled an Act to add His Royal Highness the Earl of Wessex and Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal to the persons to whom royal functions may be delegated as councillors of state. The operative clause is precise. It adds Anne and Edward to the legal definition of councillors of state for as long as each of them lives, subject to the existing provisos in the original 1937 Act covering absence from the UK or disqualification. Crucially, this did not remove Harry, Andrew, or Beatrice from the formal list. It simply expanded it. During the bill's passage, the leader of the House of Lords confirmed that only working members of the royal family would actually be called upon to act as councillors, meaning Harry, Andrew, and Beatrice remain on the list in name but are not expected to be summoned. Constitutional commentators at the time noted the cleverness of the approach. The bill names Edward, Anne, and as extra councillors of state, as if they had been appointed alongside the others under the 1937 Act, meaning that alongside William, 3 working councillors are now available to act, with the palace expected to coordinate diaries so that at least 2 are in the country at any given time. It's worth being precise about what this is and isn't. Councillors of state handle routine constitutional business when the king is briefly absent or unwell. They are not a regent, and being added to this list says nothing about the line of succession or about who would become regent if Charles were ever permanently incapacitated. That role, under the unamended Regency Act, still goes to William as the next adult in line. Nothing in the 2022 Act changes that. The other half of this story isn't legal, it's a matter of record keeping. Each year, royal watching outlets and at least one SEO research agency tally up engagements logged in the court circular, the official daily record of royal public duties, and rank the family by who showed up the most. Princess Anne has dominated that ranking for years, but the most recent figures tell a more layered story than Anne works hardest, full stop. In 2023, Anne logged 433 engagements. In 2024, the year Charles was diagnosed with cancer and Catherine, Princess of Wales, also underwent cancer treatment. That number rose to 457, and by some other counts as high as 474, making Anne the hardest-working royal for a fourth consecutive year, while the king himself completed 372 engagements despite his diagnosis. In the first 4 months of 2024 alone, and single-handedly accounted for roughly a third of all royal engagements undertaken by the entire family, prompting one outlet to describe her as the linchpin holding the institution together while other senior royals were sidelined by illness. She kept up that pace even after being hospitalized mid-year with a concussion following a horse-related accident. But 2025 changed the leaderboard. Anne's total rose again, to 478 engagements, a 10% increase on the year before, yet for the first time since 2022, she lost the top spot. King Charles overtook her with 532 engagements, a 49% jump from his reduced 2024 schedule as his treatment-related workload eased. Prince William's engagements rose 45% and Camilla's by 33% that same year, while Catherine's public duties jumped more than 400% as she resumed work after her own recovery. Taken together, the family's total engagement count climbed 22% year-on-year, from 2,001 in 2024 to 2,458 in 2025, the highest total since 2022, when the late Queen Elizabeth was still alive and working. Read in context, this isn't really a story about and slowing down. It's a story about the rest of the family catching back up to her after 2 years of treatment and recovery sidelined them. Anne's own total kept climbing even as she lost first place. Asked directly whether she had any plans to scale back, she told the Press Association there isn't really a retirement program for this particular life, it simply isn't written in. Her dedication also goes back further than the recent headlines suggest. Her first official royal duty came in 1969, meeting Welsh soldiers at the age of 18, more than 5 decades before any of this. That long track record is consistent with how royal commentators describe her. Longtime royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams has called Anne absolutely pivotal to keeping the monarchy afloat, noting she gives the king down-to-earth advice and is seen as critical to winning over public support for the institution. Fitzwilliams added that Anne is synonymous with dedication to duty, relishes a high workload, and usually undertakes more royal engagements than any other member of the family. This reputation isn't new, and stepped into a steadying role during the days following Queen Elizabeth II's death in September 2022, and she has continued to be a visible, dependable presence at major state occasions since, including standing alongside William and Edward as a royal colonel at Trooping the Colour in June 2026, in normal ceremonial formation, not in any kind of standing capacity for an absent king. Princess Anne's position is also a useful lesson in how Britain's succession rules have changed during her own lifetime. She is Queen Elizabeth II's second child, born in 1950, 3 years before her mother became queen. But for most of Anne's life, the rule governing the throne was male preference primogeniture. Sons took precedence over daughters regardless of birth order. That meant Anne, older than both Andrew and Edward, was nonetheless placed behind both of her younger brothers in the line of succession for decades, simply because she was a woman. That rule was finally abolished by the Succession to the Crown Act 2013, which replaced male preference with absolute primogeniture so that the eldest child inherits regardless of sex. But the change only applies to people born after the 28th of October, 2011, the date Commonwealth leaders agreed to the reform. It did not retroactively move Anne ahead of her brothers. As a result, Anne currently sits well down the line of succession, outside the top 10, behind Charles, William and his 3 children, Harry and his 2 children, and Andrew and his daughters. She walked in Prince Philip's funeral procession in 2021 as the only woman among her brothers, a detail that drew attention partly because succession-related convention had so often placed her a step behind them throughout her life. That history is precisely why the Councillors of State Act 2022 was necessary in the first place. Because Anne is so far down the formal line of succession, she was never going to be among the next 4 adults automatically eligible to act as a Councillor of State. That pool is determined strictly by succession order, and her nephews and niece, Harry, Andrew, Beatrice, occupied those top slots ahead of her, despite being less actively engaged in royal duties. The 2022 Act was the only way to bring Anne, by then the family's most active working royal by a wide margin, into that pool at all, since ordinary succession order would never have put her there on its own. It's a neat illustration of the gap between formal succession position and practical royal workload. The law had to be specifically amended to let the hardest working member of the family actually do more of the constitutional work. Anne's public reputation as duty-bound rather than power-seeking is well documented in her own words over the years. She has spoken about not needing official recognition for her work, framing her approach to royal life around service rather than acknowledgement. She made the choice not to give her own children, Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall, royal titles, a decision that set her apart from how titles are typically passed down in the family. She has also been notably blunt with, and about, other members of the family. One widely reported example, and reportedly turned down a change to royal protocol that Camilla had wanted to introduce, an episode royal watchers point to as evidence that Anne speaks her mind regardless of who's asking. That bluntness is part of why commentators like Fitzwilliams argue her honesty is valuable to Charles specifically. A sibling willing to disagree with him is useful precisely because so few people in that position are. Here's where the real historical parallel comes in, and it's a genuinely good one, even without any embellishment. And Princess Royal and Princess of Orange, born in 1709, was the second child and eldest daughter of King George II of Great Britain. She was a Princess Royal, just as today's Princess Anne is. She married William IV, Prince of Orange, the first hereditary stadtholder of all 7 provinces of the northern Netherlands. When her husband died in 1751, the political structure of the Dutch Republic required someone to govern on behalf of their son, who was far too young to rule, and became regent of the Netherlands from 1751 until her own death in 1759, exercising extensive powers on behalf of her son, William V. That's 8 years of genuine governing authority, approving decisions, managing relationships with foreign powers, running the affairs of a major European republic, held by a woman whose claim to the role came entirely through marriage and motherhood, not through any line of succession of her own. The Anglophile angle is also real, and it's a useful cautionary note rather than a flattering one. She was known as an Anglophile because of her English upbringing and family connections, but despite her position and her efforts, she was unable to convince the Dutch Republic to enter the 7 Years' War on the side of the British. In other words, real power, real loyalty to her birth country, and a real limit to what either could accomplish against the practical resistance of the institution she was nominally running. It's a genuinely instructive historical footnote about the gap between formal authority and actual influence, something any regent, hypothetical or otherwise, eventually runs into. When Anne died in 1759, she was succeeded as regent by her mother-in-law, Marie-Louise of Hesse-Kassel, assisted by Duke Louis Ernest of Brunswick-Luneburg, and when Marie-Louise died, Anne's own daughter Carolina served as regent until William V came of age in 1766. It's a chain of regencies running across 3 generations of women holding power on behalf of men too young to hold it themselves, a detail that tends to get lost in the broader sweep of 18th century royal history. There's no documented connection between this 18th century precedent and any current palace planning. It is, at most, a striking historical coincidence of names and roles, a previous Princess Royal named and who actually exercised regency power, not evidence of any deliberate modern echo. This isn't a hypothetical mechanism. It has real precedent going back decades, which helps explain why Charles was so keen to keep the bench properly stocked. Councillors of state have been called upon repeatedly across the monarchy's modern history, almost always for mundane reasons: a state visit abroad, a hospital stay, a period of recovery. During Queen Elizabeth II's reign, documents in the National Archives even show the palace coordinating royal holiday schedules around the requirement to have enough councillors in the country. In 1970, Princess Margaret was reportedly asked to cut a holiday short specifically so that, alongside the Queen Mother, 2 councillors of state would be available to act. That logistical detail matters more than it sounds. The role isn't ceremonial window dressing. It requires councillors to be physically present and willing to exercise real constitutional functions, sometimes on short notice. With Harry living in the United States and Andrew withdrawn from public life, the pre-2022 pool of available councillors had effectively shrunk to 2 reliable people, William and Camilla. Adding Anne and Edward didn't just symbolically pad the list, it meaningfully restored the kind of operational redundancy the system depends on, particularly at a moment when the King's own health made that redundancy more important than usual. Constitutional commentators at University College London's Constitution Unit, who tracked the bill closely, described it at the time as an elegant solution to an immediate problem, while also flagging that it was likely only a temporary fix, as the current council is of state age, and as younger royals further down the succession line come of age, Princess Charlotte becomes eligible in the 2030s, for instance. Parliament will probably need to revisit the question again. Strip away the speculation, and the legal answer is the one the 1937 Act has always given: William, as the next adult in the line of succession, would become regent, following confirmation from at least 3 of the 5 designated officials: Queen Camilla, the Lord Chancellor, the Speaker of the House of Commons, the Lord Chief Justice, and the Master of the Rolls. What's changed is everything around that scenario, not the scenario itself. And an Edward can now legally handle the day-to-day constitutional paperwork, royal assent, ambassadorial credentials, Privy Council business, when Charles is briefly unavailable, which reduces the pressure on the system during short absences or treatment-related disruptions. That's a meaningful, real adjustment to how the monarchy functions week to week. It is not a rewriting of who becomes regent in a genuine long-term incapacity. Royal succession planning is also, by its nature, mostly invisible to the public. Aides do think years ahead about contingencies. That's standard practice for any institution managing leadership transition risk, royal or otherwise, but the documented, legally binding change that has actually happened is the 2022 Act, and it did exactly what it says on paper: widen the bench of working royals who can keep the constitutional machinery running, with and, characteristically, near the center of it. That's arguably the more interesting story anyway. Not a secret succession plot, but a 75-year-old woman who has spent her entire adult life being the family member who simply does the work, and an 18th-century institution quietly, legally making room for her to keep doing more of it.